An unemployed man had secretly withdrawn thousands of dollars from the family for an online relationship that his relatives believed was an illusion. When his parents and brother tried to stop him, all three were unexpectedly found deceased one by one in their own home. Was it all just an unbelievable coincidence, or had every smallest detail been calculated and arranged coldly in advance? The family of Chad Amato was seen by many people in the area as the image of a stable middle-class family in Chiliota, a small and fairly quiet community in Seminole County. It is a place with a relatively slow pace of life, where many families have lived for a long time and know one another. For many years, the Amato family lived a fairly stable life, with secure jobs and a family environment that many people around them believed had a strong educational foundation and a clear direction for the children's future. The father, Chad Amato, was a clinical pharmacist who had spent many years working in the healthcare field. His work required precision, discipline, and a high level of responsibility, and people who had worked with Chad often described him as serious, careful, and someone who always set high standards for himself as well as in his work. For Chad, stability in a career and a strong sense of personal responsibility were not only important elements in his work, but also the foundation for building a sustainable life for the entire family. Chad always expected his children to pursue their education and career seriously. He believed that education, discipline, and a clear career direction would help his children have a stable future. In the eyes of many people who knew them, the Amato family at that time seemed to be the model of a family with a solid foundation, where the members were all following fairly clearly defined paths. However, few could have imagined that behind that stability, quiet tensions within the family were gradually accumulating. Difficulties and unresolved conflicts over time began to create small cracks, and these factors later became part of the picture that led to the tragedy that occurred afterward. The mother, Margaret Amato, held a senior executive management position in a company and was described by many people who knew her as a thoughtful, careful woman who carried responsibility in both her work and her family life. In the workplace, she was considered someone with strong organizational ability who often handled matters cautiously and methodically. People who had worked with Margaret believed that she was someone who always paid attention to details and tried to maintain stability in every decision she made. But when she returned home, Margaret took on another role that was just as important: the person who kept everything in the family running steadily. She tried to maintain a family environment in which members could support one another and get through difficult periods in life together. For Margaret, family was not only a place to live, but also the foundation that helped each person remain strong when facing challenges. People who knew the Amato family often said that Margaret cared deeply about her children and always tried to maintain the connection between family members. In many difficult situations, she was usually the one who stepped forward to listen, find ways to solve problems, and support her children both financially and emotionally. She believed that if family members were willing to help one another, then even the most difficult periods could be overcome. Because of that belief, Margaret made many efforts to help her children get through unstable periods in their lives. She hoped that the support from the family would give them another opportunity to stabilize things and start over again. In the eyes of those around her, Margaret was seen as someone who always tried to keep her family united and resilient in the face of challenges, a mother who tried to maintain stability for her family even when things began to become difficult. Their eldest son, Cody Amato, was building a fairly solid career in the medical field. After completing specialized training, Cody began working as a nurse anesthetist, a position that requires high professional knowledge as well as strong focus and responsibility in the hospital environment. His work was often associated with surgical procedures, where precision and coordination with the medical team play a very important role. Colleagues who worked with Cody often commented that he was someone who had clear direction in his career. He was known as a hardworking person, someone who followed discipline and always tried to complete his duties carefully. In the medical environment, where work pressure can be very high, Cody was considered a reliable person with a strong sense of responsibility. For the family, Cody was often seen as someone who had stabilized his life and was moving in the right direction with the career path he had chosen. This made many people around him believe that his future in the medical field would continue to develop in a fairly stable direction. However, everything began to change when Grant Amato started facing difficulties in his personal life. Grant had studied nursing like his older brother and had also spent some time working in a hospital environment. At that time, many people believed that he would continue developing his career in a similar direction and gradually stabilize his life in the medical field. But over time, that path began to encounter obstacles. The difficulties that Grant faced gradually caused his life to turn in a different direction, and it was from this period that the changes within the Amato family began to become more noticeable. But Grant's career did not last as expected. After working for a period of time, he was suspended from his job due to suspicions that he had violated professional regulations at his workplace. This incident not only affected his current position, but also made it much more difficult for him to find new opportunities in the healthcare field. As the door to his professional career gradually closed, Grant Amato entered a period of instability in his life. Not long after that, Grant returned to live with his family. At first, his parents believed this was only a temporary phase, and they hoped that with the support of the family, he would be able to stabilize his life and find a new direction for his future. They hoped Grant could regain stability, find a new job, and start over. However, instead of searching for career opportunities, Grant began spending most of his time on the internet. It was during this period that he started developing an obsession with a Bulgarian webcam model who used the alias Sylvie. At first, the webcam sessions were simply a form of online entertainment. However, over time, that connection gradually became deeper in Grant's mind. Webcam platforms often allow viewers to send tips or online gifts to performers in exchange for attention during live stream sessions. After spending a period of time regularly watching live stream sessions, Grant Amato began spending money on those online conversations, and the amount quickly started to grow. At first, they were only small tips meant to attract attention during live broadcasts. However, over time, both the frequency and the amount of money Grant sent increased significantly. Within just a few months, he had used more than $200,000 from his family's bank accounts and credit cards to pay for online chats and virtual gifts. Most of this money was transferred to accounts connected to the webcam model he followed, who used the alias Sylvie. In the early stage, the Amato family had no idea what was happening. The money was transferred little by little, and it took some time before the unusual transactions began to clearly appear in the family's financial records. As the unusual numbers continued to increase, Chad Amato and Margaret Amato began examining the bank transactions more closely. What they discovered left them truly shocked. At first, it appeared that tens of thousands of dollars had disappeared from the accounts. But as they continued reviewing the records, the amount quickly rose to hundreds of thousands of dollars. For the family, this was not only a large financial loss, but also a sign that a serious problem was developing. When they confronted Grant Amato, he admitted that he had spent the money on webcam chats. However, Grant insisted that his relationship with Sylvie was real and not simply an online service. From his perspective, it was a personal relationship that he trusted and wanted to continue maintaining. His family did not see it the same way. To them, it was a sign that Grant had become deeply involved in a virtual relationship and might be losing control over both his finances and his time. Concerned that Grant might be developing an addiction to the internet and adult content, the family decided to intervene. They took him to a treatment facility, hoping that the program would help him break his dependence on online relationships and regain balance in his life. After completing the treatment program, Grant returned home. However, according to what the family observed afterward, the situation did not seem to change as much as they had hoped. Grant continued trying to contact the webcam model through different methods. He created new accounts, used different devices, and even tried to continue sending money. When Chad discovered that Grant was still maintaining contact with the webcam model, he decided that clear limits had to be set. Grant was required to completely end that connection, and if he did not, he would have to leave the house. The arguments between Grant and his family became increasingly tense. It was not only about the issue of money, but also about the disappointment and the trust that was gradually breaking down among the members of the family. On January 24th, 2019, the long-standing tensions within the family appeared to have reached their peak. That evening, a tragedy began to unfold inside the Amato family home in Chiliota. What happened afterward took place within a relatively short period of time, but its consequences left the entire local community shocked. According to investigators, Margaret Amato was believed to be the first to encounter trouble while working at home that evening. Not long after, when Chad Amato returned home from work, he also became the next victim. The events were believed to have occurred quickly inside the house, and no one in the family had the chance to react or seek help. At that time, outside the house, everything still appeared to be an ordinary evening in the quiet neighborhood. But inside, serious events had begun to unfold, leading to a tragedy that would later become the focus of a major criminal investigation in the area. Meanwhile, Cody Amato was still working his shift at the hospital as usual. For Cody, it was just a normal shift in his familiar routine. However, that evening, a message was sent from Chad Amato's phone asking Cody to return home. The content of the message did not appear unusual, so Cody had no reason to be suspicious. To him, it was simply a familiar message from his family. There were no signs suggesting that the message would become the last communication of his life. When Cody left the hospital and returned home that night, he likely believed he was simply going back to the familiar scene of his family as on any other day. But when Cody entered the house, what awaited him behind the door was no longer the normal atmosphere of the Amato family. What happened inside the house at that time later became an important part of the investigation. The next morning, when Cody did not appear at work, his colleagues began to feel worried. In the hospital environment, Cody was known as a responsible person and rarely missed a shift without prior notice. His sudden absence without any notification quickly made people realize that something was not right. After trying to contact him several times without receiving any response, his colleagues decided to request that the police conduct a welfare check at the Amato family home. That decision led officers to the house in Chiliota, where they were about to discover a scene that would surprise even experienced investigators. When the officers entered the Amato family home in Chiliota, they quickly realized that this was not an ordinary incident. During the initial check, 3 victims were discovered in different locations throughout the house, and all of them were deceased. The atmosphere inside the house made the officers understand that they were facing a serious crime scene that needed to be secured and investigated immediately. What drew the investigators' attention was that all the doors were locked, and there were no signs of forced entry from outside. These initial details led them to consider the possibility that this could have been a murder followed by a suicide within the family. However, when the investigation team began analyzing the scene more carefully, several details started to appear that did not fully match the initial hypothesis. The position of the gun, the trajectory of the gunshots, and the way the victims were found all raised many questions. Some details at the scene did not seem consistent with the scenario of one person committing the killings and then taking their own life. These unusual points led investigators to reconsider the entire initial theory. In addition, when they began examining the electronic devices in the house, several notable pieces of information were discovered. Data from phones and communication devices showed that some messages had been sent from the victims' phones after the time they were believed to have died. This detail made investigators suspect that the scene may have been arranged to create a different story from what had actually happened. From that point on, the direction of the investigation quickly changed. Instead of continuing to focus on the initial hypothesis, investigators began expanding their review of individuals who were directly connected to the Amato family. They re-examined relationships, movement timelines, and the recent activities of each family member in order to determine who might be connected to what had happened inside the house that night. During this process, one important detail gradually drew the investigators' attention. Grant Amato, the remaining son in the family, was the only person who was not present at the scene when officers arrived to check the house. This fact led investigators to take a closer look at Grant's location, activities, and communications during the time the incident occurred. As they continued collecting information and comparing related data, Grant gradually became a central figure in the investigation. From someone who was initially seen simply as the remaining member of the family, he quickly became the focus of investigators as they attempted to determine what had actually happened inside the Amato family home. 2 days after the incident was discovered, investigators were able to determine the location of Grant Amato. He was found staying at a hotel in the Orange County area and was quickly taken into custody by authorities for investigation. Afterward, Grant was brought to the station for questioning. During the initial interrogation, Grant appeared relatively calm and denied any involvement in the deaths of the members of his family. He claimed that when he had left the house earlier, everything had been completely normal and that he did not know what had happened afterward. Through his explanation, Grant attempted to show that he had not been present at the scene at the time the incident occurred. However, when investigators began comparing Grant's statements with the data collected from electronic devices, several inconsistencies gradually appeared. Phone data, computer search history, financial transactions, and the timeline of movements on the night of the incident all revealed details that conflicted with what Grant had said. When questioned further about his whereabouts during the critical time period and his online activities after the incident, Grant began to change some details in his explanations. Some of his answers became more vague and general compared to earlier statements, which drew even more attention from the investigators. Investigators also carefully analyzed financial transactions, internet search history, and the timeline of Grant's movements on the night of the incident. When all of this data was placed side by side, a clearer picture began to emerge. Details that initially appeared unrelated gradually connected with one another and revealed several inconsistencies with Grant's original explanation. These differences caused investigators' suspicions to grow stronger. Even without a direct confession, the digital and financial evidence became key elements that helped investigators reconstruct the sequence of events that occurred that night. After all the evidence had been fully collected, analyzed, and compiled, the case file was eventually completed. The investigative materials were then moved to the prosecution stage, paving the way for the formal trial process in court, where prosecutors would present the full body of evidence before the jury. The trial of Grant Amato began in July 2019 in Seminole County and quickly attracted significant attention from both the media and the public. The case generated considerable debate because of the factors involving money, online relationships, and the family conflicts that had developed before the tragedy occurred. During the trial, the prosecution presented a series of pieces of evidence in order to reconstruct the circumstances that led to the crime. They introduced financial records showing that a very large amount of money had been transferred to accounts connected to the webcam model that Grant had been following. According to the prosecutors, these financial transfers, combined with Grant's prolonged unemployment, created significant pressure within the family and became the source of many arguments before the incident took place. In addition to the financial evidence, the court also heard testimony from several witnesses connected to the Amato family. One of the key witnesses was Grant's half-brother. In his testimony, he described the efforts the family had made to help Grant through a difficult period in his life. According to the witness, the family had repeatedly tried to support Grant both financially and emotionally. They had helped him deal with certain debts and had also taken him to a treatment facility, hoping that the treatment would help him end his dependence on online relationships. However, according to what was presented in court, those efforts ultimately could not prevent the chain of events that later led to the tragedy. But in the end, all the efforts made earlier seemed unable to prevent what had happened. After several days of trial and reviewing all the evidence presented in court, the jury reached a conclusion regarding Grant Amato. The final verdict found Grant guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder related to the deaths of members of his family. During the debate over sentencing, the prosecution requested that the court impose the death penalty, arguing that the nature of the crime was particularly serious. However, under the laws of Florida, in order to impose the death penalty, the jury must reach a unanimous decision. In this case, the members of the jury did not reach complete agreement on that sentence. As a result, the court imposed a life sentence on Grant Amato. Under the final ruling, he must serve life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for each count. This means that Grant will spend the remainder of his life in the prison system, bringing an end to a case that attracted significant public attention and debate at the time. The case concluded with a severe sentence, but it also raised many questions about the influence of obsession and the online world on human behavior. The family had tried to support Grant through treatment and financial assistance, yet the virtual relationships gradually began to dominate his decisions. This tragedy became a reminder of the serious consequences that can occur when the boundary between reality and illusion becomes blurred and when family conflicts are not resolved in time. The case in this video is based on a real event that occurred on January 24, 2019, in Chiliota. The information has been compiled from investigative records and the public court trial process. The content of the video has been produced by the channel's editorial team with the purpose of providing information and analyzing the case from a true crime documentary perspective, and it is not intended to promote or justify acts of violence.